There was one Marine who was out in the open, badly wounded. This 20-year-old sergeant of Marines rushes across this terrain to go collect up his wounded Marine and bring him back to the relative safety of a little wooded area. This Marine, mortally wounded, looks up at his 20-year-old sergeant and said, "I knew you'd come for me." There are a few things in life other than military service that generate that kind of closeness.
Yeah.
We all knew that we'd all come for each other in difficult situations. And so Medal of Honor recipients always will tell you that there were lots of brave people that day.
Oh, yeah.
And that you wear the medal not for yourself, but for all those, not just in your action, but for all those, since the 1860s, all those who can't, never came back.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to American Grit. This is Tim Jensen, and we have a very, very exciting episode for you today. It is not all the time that we get to interview some clout like we were about to today. We're talking to Jack Jacobs. He is a former United States Army infantry officer. He's Medal of Honor recipient, two-time Silver Star recipient, 3 Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts. This guy is a walking legend, my friends. Not only that, he's a advisor, military analyst for NBC News, MSNBC. He's a writer, speaks a lot about military leadership and just leadership in general. He's an entrepreneur, and this man has done it all. And he's a very, very interesting individual that we want to share his story with all of you because we believe that there are things that you can take away from it, learn from it, and apply it into your life, and potentially live a life like this man has done over the course of his time on the planet. Jack, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Tim, for having me.
Absolutely. Now, that was a big opening. But
that's it, folks. We're leaving.
We're out of here. And one of the things we were talking about before the show today was I've through my life, I've read a lot of military history, and it's been a big thing for me. And it has a lot of moments in my life that of inspiration, and a lot of those really came to reading on Mac v. Sog, and to be sitting across from a legend that has operated in those paradigms. It's quite the honor, my friend.
Well, it's extremely difficult to do that kind of work, as a lot of advisors know. You're involved with people who've been pretty much doing the same thing for a long time, and you're trying to get them to do something different and more conducive to success. Mm-hmm. Inertia's a hell of a thing, and it often doesn't yield to yelling at them or giving them extra food or cigarettes, or sometimes it's bad experience that'll convince them that you're absolutely right, mm-hmm. especially when the people you're trying to get to do the right thing are they're just inured to not doing the right thing.
Right.
So it's a really tough business, and it's a dangerous business too, because most of the time, you're out there with no support. So it's tough. Why I got stuck doing that thing is beyond me. The argument with my assignment officer was that you've got a college degree, so that's what you're doing. Back in those days, nobody chose anything. You were told what to do and how to act. And the military establishment, particularly the Army, was so disorganized. They couldn't even get you to school before they sent you out to do stuff. So my first assignment was in Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion Airborne, 505th Infantry, in the 82nd Airborne Division. I went directly from taking the oath of office at Rutgers University and got into my 58 Volkswagen that was painted iridescent white with New Jersey State highway line paint. You could find it in the guy I bought it from had been working for the highway department. In any case, down to my unit in the 82nd, without first going to jump school, basic infantry officer course, ranger school, or anything else, straight to the unit, because the Army was trying to funnel people to Vietnam as quickly as they possibly could, and had no idea how to coordinate the requirement for people to be school trained.
Right. This is 1958, right?
This is 66.
Okay, 66.
Yeah, the car was 58. and was crumpled in the back.
Okay.
It was just a complete wreck. This guy's wife had backed it into a telephone pole.
Oh, man.
They didn't even have a fuel gauge. You knew you ran out of fuel when you ran out of fuel.
Yeah.
In any case, 66 at the height of shipping people over. When I got to Vietnam in September 67, we had 500,000 Americans in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Large-scale units like the 1st Cav and Marine, lots and lots of Marines, and the 1st Infantry Division and the 173rd and so on, and then a bunch of hapless saps like me who were out advising Vietnamese, snooping around in Laos and Cambodia and all the rest of that stuff. Totally uncoordinated exercise.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, we didn't do a very good job of it. But I had to go to, I joined my unit when it was out on an FTX as a leg in an airborne company before they finally found a slot for me to go to jump school.
Oh, man.
This tell you, you talked about 58. I'll tell you how long ago it was. The first 5 airplane rides I ever took, I jumped out of them. And I wasn't alone. I mean, lots and lots of people had never been in an airplane till they went to jump school.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, pretty. Yeah, it is indeed.
Yeah. Now, for those that are not too familiar with MACV-SOG, that was the beginnings of special operations in American military, right? You had the elements of World War II that were kind of the OSS and the beginnings of the CIA, and you get a lot of the Rangers, the birth of the Rangers during that time period. You didn't see much of special operations in the Korean conflict, but Vietnam, jungle environment, completely different warfare than anything the United States has experienced since Nicaragua. And we needed to do things differently, right? And understanding the battle space of Vietnam during that time period, that was a whole situation of bad decisions that were coming from the end of World War II. You had Ho Chi Minh sitting here saying, hey, guys, the Chinese are coming, and America saying, it's
he asked us to help him out.
Yeah.
We advised him through our special operations business, advised him during the Second World War. And when the war was over, said exactly what you're talking about. Says, hey, give me a hand. And he said, no, we're not going to do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, war's over and we're not interested anymore. And we bailed out of absolutely everything, including our special operations business, and didn't resurrect it again, as you said, until just before Vietnam, when Vietnam started. And the second thing is, well, he's a communist, and so we're not going to get involved with him at all. So we bailed out of that too.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Vietnamese love us, and they're our allies.
Right.
They're trying to.
One of the biggest manufacturers, they're providing goods to America.
I went and visited. I have a friend who was running a large-scale prime government contractor. Went over there, employing 7,000 people, putting together elevators and air conditioners and selling them into China. But he was absolutely right. He said, "No, we're not having anything to do with that." And that turned out to be an extremely big mistake, which we learned to regret.
Yeah.
We were there for 10 years, but not nearly as long as we've been involved in the global war on terror. And we forget about the fact that we've been in the global war on terror for twice as long as we were seriously involved in Vietnam.
Yeah.
No, we keep making bad decisions. And the people who are making the decision, not the people on the ground. People on the ground said, we need to do X.
Right.
And the suits in Washington say, no, we're not doing that. We're going to do other stuff, and it's going to be completely dysfunctional. And that's what we wound up doing.
And here we are 70 years later, scratching our heads saying, hey, why did Afghanistan end the way that it did?
Don't get me started on that one.
Well, we'll come back to that one.
Right.
And what was very interesting during this time period, right? So, you got these MACV guys running around, advising the ARVN forces and South Vietnamese. But there was some wild statistics that were coming out of that period of time, especially 66 forward, was 100% of all MACV individuals were injured. 50% of them died. And 50 of the 1,700 MIA of Vietnam were MACV guys. Some believe that even entire squads were just disappeared into the forests.
Well, we were out on our own, you know. I wound up at the 2nd of the 16th of the 9th Infantry Division because all the advisors in the sister battalion the battalion had been overrun the night before, and the advisors, all 4 advisors, had been captured, hogtied, and executed.
Yeah.
And so they were shorter. That's how I wound up in that unit. We didn't get any support to speak of any kind. Somebody asked me one time, "What did you eat there?" I said, "Well, not 12 flavors of ice cream, I can tell you that, but we got 500-gram bags of dehydrated rice. And you put iodine tablets in your canteen and shake it up and rehydrate the rice in a plastic bag and mush it around. And sometimes you'd get a couple of hot peppers to kill the bugs. And occasionally, but infrequently, you get protein in the form of a sow's ear, slice of sow's ear, which, you know, is like chewing beef jerky that hasn't been properly cured. We'd go around getting fish out of latrine lagoons, stick them on a stick, stick the stick in the ground, get a bunch of rice hay, throw the rice hay on top of it, set fire to the rice hay, and that's what you'd eat. Otherwise, you got no protein at all.
Yeah.
Ammo, forget about it. We'd have to go forage for ammunition. We'd have to forage for weapons, and your bastard stepchildren. And so it's not surprising we got no support to speak of. Because we got no support, you had a lot of people who wound up being casualties, and when they were casualties, sometimes didn't get evacuated and died on the spot.
Yeah. Now, for, you know, again, educating people at home, this is this is an opportunity that I never have found myself in before. Is like, what was it like on the Ho Chi Minh Trail? What was the fighting involved in? What were we trying to do? I mean, historically, we understand that was the route that they were moving everything through, but you know, and you could read the stories and you can get that perspective of the individual. But you know, sitting from across the way from somebody that, you know, firsthand. Well, share with what was the strategy of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and the operations?
Well, the trail itself was a lot of trails, and we didn't realize that until we went and saw it. Gathering intelligence information wasn't at all like it is today. I mean, now we can decide to send a precision-guided munition up either the left or the right nostril of some individual guy. But back in those days, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a view of most people, particularly if they haven't been on the ground, is that, you know, it's a trail that goes from Hanoi and goes down Laos and Cambodia and then they fan out and so on. That wasn't that at all. There were innumerable trails, and if we'd pick one up, they'd use another one. They'd drive trucks if they had to, but if they got picked up, as they did from time to time, because we had recon flights, we'd pick them out, put an airstrike on them, and so on. We'd have to go send people out to find out where they went, because they weren't using that trail anymore. They were on some other trail. Intelligence was terrible. I remember even as late as 1972, we were making an attack. I was with the Vietnamese Airborne Division at the time. We were making an attack on a hill about 600 meters to our front, and we thought there was a company, a North Vietnamese company on top of that hill. Matter of fact, we thought it was a company minus. We were wrong by an order of magnitude. I mean, we didn't have satellites or RPVs, we were guessing on what was on top of that. Right? We were all wrong by an order of magnitude. There was a regiment. There were 1,200 enemy soldiers on top of that hill. I mean, if you're guessing there are 120 guys on top of the hill and there are really 1,200, you wind up losing that battle usually, and that's exactly what happened. But we guessed what was on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we were wrong almost all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Now, and that was that trail really was or the network of trails rather, was really the strategy that was used to spring off the Tet Offensive, right? That was largely how the forces were able to maneuver through into their objectives without the Americans really having any understanding of what was going on. And you were there. What was going on during Tet?
Well, I tell you, what was really interesting is that the following. I got there in the first week in September in '67, and we'd go out on a patrol or a movement to contact or a reconnaissance in force. We'd always encounter bad guys. We'd have a firefight. evacuate the killed and wounded, to kill a bunch of bad guys, capture some of them. Maybe the battle would last a day, sometimes 2 days. And as time went on, as we got closer and closer to what eventually was the Tet Offensive, we would encounter the enemy sooner, in larger numbers. The firefights would last longer, and there would be more casualties on both sides until, starting about 3 weeks before the Tet Offensive, so maybe at the turn of 67 to 68, we were in continuous combat. It wasn't that we went out on a patrol, had some combat, went home, and then the next day we went out on a patrol, had some. We were in continuous combat because the enemy had infiltrated through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, large, and had established large positions in preparation for making their attacks during Tet. And it was no fun. We started out with a battalion, 2nd of the 16th had maybe 500 people in it. By the time I got wounded on the 9th of March, 1968, my action, I think we had 100 guys, maybe 115 people in our battalion left. Everybody else had been killed or wounded. We inflicted enormous casualties on the bad guys. And it turned out to be, from a tactical standpoint, General Giap's big mistake. From a strategic standpoint, it was a huge success because what even the North Vietnamese didn't realize was that demonstrating that the Vietnamese and their American allies, they couldn't hold on to significant locations in South Vietnam, that it had convinced both the military and the political establishment, particularly the political establishment in the United States, that we couldn't win the war.
Yeah.
And even General Giap didn't realize that at that time.
Yeah. I think it's fair. Is it fair to say, that, after the fall of Khe Sanh, that strategy really started to become very apparent, that holding these specific hills was not going to be a strategy that could move forward? Well,
our problem was, now we're getting into tactics now, and my contention is that it's a bit like the Seinfeld episode. Remember the Seinfeld episode? He goes to get a medium-sized car at the race, coming off the plane. He and Elaine are going to get a medium-sized car. So I'm here for my medium-sized car. Now, let me see. Oh no, we don't have one. He said, but I reserved a medium-sized car. Well, you may have reserved it, but we don't have one. We got a big one and we got a little one. He said, but you don't understand the purpose of a reservation. She says, oh, no, we do. He said, no. If you did, I'd have a medium-sized car. So you don't understand that. You see, anybody can take a reservation.
Right.
But you got to hold on to it. And holding on to it is what it's all about. We took objectives left and right all the time.
Yeah.
Slew lots of enemy, but never held on to anything. And holding on to it is what it's all about.
Yeah.
We did the same thing in Global War on Terror.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of single factor analysis, but one of the independent variables here is that we did not want to make the political commitment to do what was really necessary in order to hold on to terrain. And that included, among other things, certainly tactically, was to have sufficient numbers of people to hold on to it. You always have a reserve. We always have a reserve. I was in the banking business for a long time. Got to have a reserve. And the reserve's there for two reasons. The first is to get you out of trouble. I mean, everybody realizes you got to have a reserve. A unit gets into trouble. We're going to send the reserve in to bail them out. That's what happened in the Cav and in 65 and so on. I mean, it happened to a lot of units.
Yeah.
But what most people don't realize that an equivalently important reason for having a reserve is to take advantage of success. If you're not going to take advantage of success, what's the point of taking an objective if you're not going to hold on to it? And we decided and continue to decide that we're not going to hold on to objectives that we spend a lot of blood and treasure in order to get. We're not going to hold on to them. Then why take them if you're not going to hold on to them?
Yeah.
We don't have the political will to do that, and that's exactly what happened in Vietnam. and in the global war on terror.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It harks back to memories of even where we were at in the Triangle in 2004, right? We turned that from a black area into a green area over a very short period of time of 7 months. An Army unit came in behind us, and they felt like some of the positions that we were very vehemently holding and establishing positions on. They're like, well, we don't need to be holding these anymore.
And a lot of those were politically driven. Don't forget,
Oh, yeah.
there was at least a draft when I was in the Army. Then, we've decided that we don't have the political will to have universal service, and the result is that they didn't have the assets. Nobody politically wants to say, oh, look, we need N people, N being 10 times the number of people we have now.
Yeah.
We're not going to do that. And the result of that, politically driven, the Army comes in there and said, well, to be honest with you, we don't have the forces to go and hold on, and we're not going to hold on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was a National Guard unit that replaced us, and they said, we got objective or a mission not to do this, yeah. Right? And and that's the slippery slope, and it all, it's all history at that point. But you mentioned something there that you were significant in the Vietnam conflict, and much like in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? The American firepower and superiority was the rule of thumb, and we put up some significant points and W's, but nothing like the I'm going to go back to the MAC-V one more time. Is in human history of combat. Recorded human history of combat, it is mentioned that MAC-V was the most deadliest fighting force in human existence, with a kill count ratio of 150 to 1 during the time period of Vietnam. That, sir, is incredible. To just understand the sheer volume of such a small unit of men that are going into this conflict and able to coerce and motivate others to do the will of those individuals, and turn those numbers out. My gosh.
Well, but it wasn't easy. I mean, if you're in the special operations business, you're really, really focused. Mm-hmm. You've got a mission, as you know. You're going to do X. Okay. And if you can take a relatively small number of people who are highly trained, intensely focused, operating on great intelligence, they're going to be able to accomplish the mission and get it all done. Not all the time, but most of the time. It is really hard work, because what you got to do is convince somebody who's been operating in a tactical unit for 20 years, who is convinced he knows better, who outranks you, to go do something that he's not inured to do. I'll tell you an amusing story. In my second tour, we had TOW missiles were brand new, and we were testing them out. I was with the 1st Airborne Battalion in Vietnam in a conventional conflict. We had artillery, they had artillery. We had tanks, they had tanks. We had a lot of people, they had a lot of people. And we were going to make an attack on this hill I was talking about. And I told the battalion commander, we got this TOW, and here's what you ought to do. Now, I'm a captain with lots of combat experience. He's a lieutenant colonel with lots more combat experience. But I said, you need to set the TOW up here. We're going to support by fire with 2 companies from here. Sergeant Biondo and I'll take 2 companies down and then go into the valley. No cover, no concealment. We try to attack the bad guys from the flank. Put the TOW here, put the 51 cal nearby, 50 cal nearby, thinking like the enemy. Start shooting at the bunkers with the TOW. And the bad guys they'll unass the bunkers, and then you hose them down with the 50 cal.
Right.
And you can support us as we're going up there. We'll lean into it, I says, I can't do that. I said, what do you mean you can't do that? He says, well, we only have the 1 TOW. And if they'll see we're doing that. They'll call artillery here on this position. I'll lose the TOW. And then I'm in big trouble. I said, but we're trying to take this hill,
Right. Right.
And if you lose the TOW, you lose the TOW. I mean,
Right.
that's the way life is.
TOW or the hill? Which one do you want?
Well, and your people.
Yeah.
I think we lost like 40. We had 40 some odd casualties going up that hill in any case. I finally convinced him to do it. I'm telling you, it was an uphill battle convincing him to do it, because he was worried about losing face and losing the TOW and getting fired and winding up in jail and all the rest of it. We get up there, Take the hill. We take the hill. Bad guys are on the way and all the rest of that stuff. And I say, okay, boss, move the toe and the 50 cal up here because we're going to have to continue the attack to the next objective, which we never did. He says, no, I'm not doing it. He says, I've been lucky once. I'm not doing it again. 2 days later, we got run off, 2,000 enemy counterattacked and ran us back off the hill, wound up back where we started from,
right.
At least partially because this guy didn't want to.
Reinforce.
No.
Yeah.
And didn't want to risk it again.
Yeah.
But you already have the experience of being successful because you did what I said.
Right.
Yeah, but that was just luck. We're not doing it again. And to say that, it's the most, advisory work is the most frustrating business in the world. And those people who have been involved in training indigenous special operations to go do what is the right thing to do, have an even more difficult road to hoe.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of managing up there, which is another part of something that you're extraordinarily present on is leadership, right? Leadership within the military, leadership within the private industries. That takes a lot of courage, which I love the saying that you say courage is not site specific, right? Yeah. Courage is something that is you're either in it or you're not.
Can't teach it either.
Right.
I mean, you're either brought up properly or not. You either feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, or you don't feel that way, and that's leadership at the end of the day, and it's leadership that generates courage. I'll tell you a funny anecdote that has nothing at all to do with combat, but it's instructive. Back when I was a battalion commander down in Panama, I had a really great battalion. One of my companies was not as good as the other. And so we managed to get, we told, it was a separate brigade. My sergeant major told the separate brigade sergeant major that his boss, me, wanted the best first sergeant he could possibly get. So I had a good company commander, pretty good NCOs, good troops and so on, but I thought the first sergeant needed a new first sergeant. There was nothing wrong with the guy, but he wasn't up to my standard.
Yeah.
He got a promotable E7 out of the Ranger Battalion. At the time, there was only one Ranger Battalion, and it was brand new. You mentioned the fact that we have to relearn how to man our services, and we hadn't had a Ranger Battalion since the Second World War. Well, there were bits and pieces of it in Korea, but this guy was a promotable E7. He was right out of central casting. He was about as big as you, had about a 12-inch waist, and he wore like a 56 long jacket. You could land an aircraft on his shoulder and take it off.
Right.
Huge guy with a basso profundo voice. Comes down. He's a promotable E7. Company commander turns it over to new first sergeant. This is right after lunch. They're back in garrison. I had everybody except one company out in the jungle, and everybody else rotated through. Turns it over to new first sergeant and comes back to the rear of the formation where I am. And I said, okay, let's go, to the company commander. He said, no, I want to hear what first sergeant's got to say. I said, no, you don't. And we left. Now, this is like at 1300. At Reveille I am not making this up, at Reveille the next morning, so not all that long, you wouldn't have recognized the company. It was like they had you had all new soldiers, all new NCOs, and all because of this guy.
Yeah.
They were top of the pops. Leadership. At the end of the day, it's leadership. And if you don't mentor younger officers and NCOs, young soldiers, you're not going to have any leadership going forward either.
Yeah.
And we forget about that all the time. It's all about us. It's all about, no, it's not about you at all.
Right.
It's about the unit, and it's not about what's going to happen today. It's about what's going to happen a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. All those kids who are private no-class dog faces are going to be sergeants. Not all of them, but a lot of them are going to be NCOs, and some are going to be sergeants major and first sergeant. If you're not thinking about how good your unit is 5-10 years from now, you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
So leadership at the end of the day is probably the most important thing in defending the Republic.
Yeah, I firmly believe that, and I think what the military produces is a very fine product when it comes to leadership, right? It's very polished, but there are some, and along that path, what you learn is you learn good leaders and you learn toxic leaders, right? Because every institution has these things, but I think what the military produces is something through its schools and in its experiences, an opportunity to really level up and be a different kind of leader that you would find if you were to mirror them against somebody that was growing in the private industry.
I'll tell you something. Nobody gets authority and responsibility at an early age like people in uniform, and there are two groups of people who don't understand that. One are employers, and I spend a lot of time talking to CEOs and people at the top of the civilian food chain about hiring veterans, and the other one are the troops themselves. They don't realize how skilled they are. I talk to kids all the time. I say, I'm an 11 Charlie. How am I going to translate that into the civilian world? I said, you already have all the skills you need in order to become a CEO of something.
Yeah.
You're better qualified to lead a group of people than the guy who may wind up hiring you. We have to do a much better job of explaining to people in uniform how incredibly skilled they are at doing stuff. We forget that at the end of the Second World War, when the war was, my father served, I think I told you, in the Second World War, we had 19 million people take their uniforms off and go preside over and participate in the greatest increase in the gross domestic product we've ever seen in this country. I hope we'll see bigger ones, but that was and why? All these people that had authority and responsibility at an early age, had been part of something much bigger than themselves, knew how to put organizations together because they'd been part of them, knew how to lead other people and all that stuff. We do a very poor job now of explaining to young people that today. And as a result, when they come out, they say, well, I'm at sea. Part of it's because we don't have universal service. They're in an environment they haven't been in before. With respect to CEOs, when I talk to them frequently, I say, well, we want to hire, and we're going to hire a lot of veterans. Why? Well, we owe it to them. I said, no, you're an idiot. Yeah, you do. But that's not the reason you're going to hire them, because this 22-year-old, 25-year-old kid has already had more responsibility and authority than you have right now. Right. That's why you're going to hire him. When I got out of the Army, I had gone to a cocktail party, and a guy who had been in the Marine Corps and had left the Marine Corps after 8 years to go to Wall Street, he came to me and he said, I had never met him before. He said, you need to retire from the Army, come to work for me. I'll pay you a lot of money to learn the bond business. When I went home, my wife asked me about this. I told her this. She said, what's the bond business? I said, absolutely no damn idea. But I was 42 years old, making $40,000 a year, and I had 3 kids. And I says, I'm going to get out. She said, but how are you going to learn the bond business? I said, I can't be that difficult.
Right.
I mean, look at all the idiots who are doing it, and nobody's shooting at you. How hard could it be?
Right.
I was absolutely right. And everybody I talk to now when it transitions out, explain to them, whatever you're going to do is 1/10 as difficult as everything you've already done. And you're perfectly skilled to do whatever you're going to do, even if you've never done it before. You're going to learn it in 10 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the wisest thing I've heard in a long time, and I believe this to be true. Is through my experiences post-military, is like I've always had a lot of anxiety of like, do I have what it takes, or yada yada yada. When I'm talking to big business leaders and these influential people, I'm learning that they don't know shit about anything. No. And all you have to do is show up. That's it. Just show up.
That's what Woody Allen said. 90% of life is showing up.
Yeah.
And they show up. But we ought to remember that too. Okay, I'm showing up.
Yep.
Now tell me what I got to do.
Right.
I mean, I wound up I got out of the Army in February 1987. Sat next to a guy who had been one of only 200 people drafted into the Marine Corps during the war in Vietnam. Tommy O'Grady, who had been up at Quezon too. And I said, well, I'm ready to make some money. He said, well, you can't make any money. Why not? He said, well, you don't have a license. You got You got to take a Series 7 test that's 8 hours long. You got to know all about finance. And I said, but I never took an economics course in my life. He said, well, you better study up because you won't make a penny. You can't get paid. You can't do anything until you've passed this exam. And gave me a book about the size of the Manhattan phone book. I don't know if anybody there knows what the Manhattan phone book like. It's about this big. But, he'd done it. He'd been in the Marine Corps, got out, did it. I was in the Army, and 6 weeks later, I had my license.
Yeah.
The people who got their licenses the fastest had all been in uniform. Huh. And the guys who had the most trouble with it, they got MBAs at Harvard and all. They had the most trouble with it. Veterans had no trouble with it whatsoever because they were all focused. Well, what do I got to do?
Yeah, yeah.
They lived their whole lives in uniform with people saying, okay, this is the first order issue. This is the objective.
All right.
Most people you talk about idiots running companies, they don't know that. They don't know that the first thing to do is to tell people what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Right, exactly.
To start at the end and work backwards.
5-paragraph order is the most important thing ever.
I'm reminded of, who was it? Wrote Alice in Wonderland, Through the Looking Glass.
Is that C.S. Lewis?
No, that was C.S. Lewis, but it was somebody similar. In any case, and it was an alias too, by the way. In any case, Through the Looking Glass, he wrote, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Oh yeah.
Duh. Except right? Except we do that all the time. We do that in the military. Especially at the strategic level. Yeah. Articulate what it is you're trying to do before you allocate resources. Because otherwise you're going to waste your resources. You'll need them and you won't have them, and you'll piss them away, and you won't be able to accomplish the mission because you haven't You can't, in the military, you can't do anything unless you tell the lowest ranking person what it is you're trying to do.
Right.
Oh, okay, now I can do it. Do the same thing in business. We do the same thing in our personal lives. We go piss away resources and without realizing that, wait a minute, I should have said what it is we're going to do here before I throw away scarce resources. And
that's it. And you're a big proponent of backward planning.
Backward planning,
right? And we've. I could tell you here in our business, so we use backward planning in almost everything we do. The 5-paragraph order is how we built this business, and it works, right? And to your point of like that young military leader, right? Where else are you going to find in the American economy an individual that is a master of doing more with less? Yeah. I remember a time when we were about to deploy to Iraq, and we're doing all these workups in Camp Pendleton, right? We're a reserve unit there. And weapons company, which I was a part of, was getting wrapped in to do motorized patrols using the old formats of the CAT teams and improving upon that. But the challenge was that we didn't have any access to vehicles. So how were we supposed to train mechanized movements and attacks on objectives if we do not have the resources to do that, right? And I'm like, this is very typical of the Marine Corps. But what we had come up with, is I took a bunch of Marines down to the golf course, and we took out all the golf carts that we could, and we were doing patrols on the golf course while flag officers are sitting there golfing, and we're driving across the pyramid, right? And they're all screaming at us, and then when they came back up to the clubhouse, and we're all like doing loops in the gravel. Then one of them come up and like, "What the fuck are you Marines doing?" Blah blah blah. Like, "Hey, sir, we don't have the assets.
We're training, man.
We're training." And he's like, "This is the shit the Marine Corps is why we are who we are." I'm like, "Well, I agree with you, but the Marine Corps could be a lot better if we actually had the funding." And that's why I say that Army Rangers are nothing more than Marines with money.
Well, a little bit more money, actually.
Yeah.
Lewis Carroll.
Carroll. That's it.
I can't. Memory's the second thing to go, and I can't remember the first one, but it's Lewis Carroll who wrote Alice in Wonderland and Jabberwocky and so on.
Absolutely. Now, with the changing of leadership or showing up, right, and courage not being site specific, that was very. You could take that with that one statement and apply it to your Medal of Honor circumstance, right? Where I believe it was Lieutenant Colonel was killed, and you had to step into.
He was a major, and he was in charge of the nominally in charge of the 2 lead companies of our battalion that was in front.
So they lost the leadership, and here comes Second Lieutenant Jacobs.
Well, I was a first lieutenant at the time, but only just.
Wrote it in saying, "Hey guys, follow me." Right? What was going through your mind at that moment in time?
Other than the shrapnel,
Right? Yeah, because you had some mortar injuries at that time.
A few injuries. Well, a bunch of things. Everything happens all at once.
Yeah.
And you start getting tunnel vision. It's like looking through a straw. And if you look at people who are in difficult situations, whether it's in combat or any other time, you see them moving their heads around because they're not taking things in a continuous way. I mean, they're like birds looking around everywhere, trying to find out what's going on, and you can't figure out, yourself, in a difficult combat situation. One of the things you don't know is like everything. You don't know, generally where the enemy is, and unless you can see him up close, which we did actually, but you can't figure out what the disposition is, what you have to do in order to overcome them, and it dawns on you the realization that that it's a genuine crisis. Now, if you're at the bottom of the food chain in the military and you're in combat, it's always a crisis. Mm-hmm. In business and government and other things, other enterprises, it's not like that. I tell people all the time, if you're working for a guy who said everything's a crisis, then nothing's a crisis. A crisis is a very specific set of circumstances. Things are really bad. They're getting worse. Something has to be done right now. And if it's not done right now, everything's going down the toilet.
Yeah.
There are very few circumstances, except in combat, when this is the case. And even in combat, it's only the people who are right at the cutting edge who find that this is the way to look at things.
Yeah.
I was badly wounded. My NCO was badly wounded, and everybody else was badly wounded or dead. And you come to the realization that something has to be, not only is this a crisis and something has to be done, but that you may be the only person who can do it. And if you do nothing, everybody's going to die.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of interesting. People ask all the time, are you scared in situations like that in combat? And my answer is yes, but it doesn't paralyze you. And it actually has the opposite effect. I mean, there's nothing that galvanizes people to action in really difficult circumstances than the realization is that they better do something, even if it's wrong. Otherwise, you're going to die. You can't sit there because you're going to die if you sit there.
Yeah.
You may die if you don't sit there, but you're definitely going to die if you sit there. And the second thing that motivates people is the sense of community that these are your buddies.
Yeah.
And in a similar situation, if the situation were reversed, they'd do the same for you. It's because you're all in it. It's like Benjamin Franklin said just before the Revolutionary War started. He wrote, "We either hang together, or we're surely going to hang separately."
Right.
And if people who've been in combat, they look back on it and say, that's absolutely right. We're all in it together, and people do all kinds of things, which generate valorous actions in combat. I'm reminded of a friend of mine was a Marine up at Quezon. He had lied. You could get away with that back in those days, but now the government has a picture of your retina. They can't be right. But he used his brother's birth certificate. He left high school in the Bronx to go join the Marines. Was up at Quezon during the Tet Offensive. Was in a Marine squad that was run by a 20-year-old E5.
Jesus.
They were outside the wire during Quezon, snooping and pooping, trying to find out exactly what the disposition of the enemy closest to their sector was. Got into this enormous firefight. Some of the Marines were wounded. I think 1 or 2 of them were killed. It was one Marine who was out in the open, badly wounded. This 20-year-old sergeant of Marines rushes across this terrain to go collect up his wounded Marine and bring him back to the relative safety of a little wooded area. And this Marine, he mortally wounded. looks up at his 20-year-old sergeant and said, "I knew you'd come for me." There are a few things in life other than military service that generate that kind of closeness.
Yeah.
We all knew that we'd all come for each other
Yeah.
in difficult situations. And so Medal of Honor recipients always will tell you that there were lots of brave people that day.
Oh, yeah.
And that you wear the medal not for yourself, but for all those, not just in your action, but for all those, since the 1860s,
Yeah.
all those who can't,
Yeah.
never came back.
And you make a great point there is, and as you're talking, like I'm going through memories of my own of some of the most dreadful moments when I was in Iraq, and where I thought I was going to die. And man, it's make my stomach flutter just having those memories right now. But in every one of those circumstances, I was able to get through it all because of the person that was on the left of me or the right of me, and knowing that hey man, this is a shared suck. Like that debt fuse didn't go off, and we have to crawl out there and rewire that thing, and we don't know if it's going to go off, but you and me are going to do it together.
You're not
and
in
it
it
has to get
alone.
done, right?
That's part of the problem with post-service life for a lot of kids who are in uniform. Unlike the Second World War, when you were part of, you knew it was a shared suck, and you came out and everybody around you had served also. We don't have that now.
Yeah.
You come out of an environment in which everybody knew you could rely on everybody else into an environment in which people don't even know that you've served. Statistically, most Americans today do not know anybody in uniform.
Yeah.
I mean, that puts the kid who has been in uniform at a distinct disadvantage. He knows that nobody knows what it's like to be in a situation when you have to rely on other people.
Yeah.
And he's not sure that, matter of fact, pretty certain that he can't rely on anybody around him except those people who've also served, and he doesn't even know who they are.
Right. But at the same time, that individual is going to rise to the top in these manufactured crises that plague the private industry, right? Because, to your point, right, when I sit here and I'm looking at people get all stressed out and the world looks like it's collapsing around everybody, it's like, ask yourself two questions. Am I being shot at? And am I going to die? If I could say no to those two things, I could change the world around me.
It can't be that difficult.
Right?
I've been through all that stuff,
Right.
and I survived that. I could do the rest. The rest of this stuff is easy.
Yeah.
I could take this 8-hour test. All I got to do is study a little bit. That's
Right. And it's going to suck, right? It's going to.
It is definitely going to suck, but I can beat it.
But we'll get through it together. Absolutely. There was one question I was really excited to ask you. I was looking at your salad bowl of ribbons and accomplishments. Where did you earn your air medal from?
Well, back in those days, I don't know what the criteria are now, but back in those days, if you made a certain number of combat assaults in helicopters, if you were a non-aviator, an aviator got it as a function of how many hours he flew and the crew members. But if you were a grunt, if you made, I think the number was 25. If you made 25 combat assaults, you got an air medal. So it was kind of like showing up. Now, you didn't have any choice. You didn't say, well, I don't think I'm going to make this combat assault. Get in a helicopter. And, of course, the doors didn't close either. Everybody's hanging on the skids and all that stuff. When I look back on that, I mean, we're flying in a helicopter, nap of the earth.
Right.
With 8 guys sitting on the doors open, flying like this, not strapped in.
Bunch of 18-year-olds
when I look back on it,
grabbing each other's
18-year-old kids and going into hot LZ. They
Right.
were all hot. And but that was it. You had to show up. But, of course, you didn't have the choice not to show up.
Right.
So a lot of people got air medals.
You had to survive.
Well, we were talking earlier today, or yesterday, if you were an E1 in Vietnam and you were still alive 2 years later, you were an E6.
No shit.
If you were an O1 in Vietnam and you were alive 2 years later, you were an O3.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, people were losing people left and right.
Yeah.
You, man, You're now a staff
You're it.
sergeant. Get moving.
That's it. Oh man! And this is like that strategy was just being introduced in the air assault in Vietnam, right? So a lot of people are just like, okay, we're just gonna fly you in, drop you off, get the fuck out.
By the way, the people who were flying these helicopters, 19 and 20-year-old warrants.
Yeah.
Kids who enlisted to go to flight school. They went to basic and AIT,
amazing.
then wound up in flight school, and they're 20 years old.
Yeah.
Flying a helicopter.
The most amazing thing in the world to me, and I know that you can appreciate this in your long list of things, is knowing that the idea, the institutions of the United States of America, from its defense to its legislation to its judiciary, is all ran by 20-year-olds.
A great movie, if you haven't seen it, you got to see it, is The Memphis Belle.
Yes.
And it's a true story about a bunch of kids flying a B-17. And they are it's among the very small number of war movies that's really true.
Yeah.
And you've got some kid who's, I don't know, 20. He's the oldest guy in the crew, and he's the pilot, and he's 25.
Right.
I mean, give me a break. A Medal of Honor recipient, now deceased, at Fort Rutgers, named after him, is going to be named after Mike Novosel. I don't know how old he was, but I met him when I was decorated. He had flown B-29s in the Second World War, and he was really short like me. I don't know how tall people manage to survive combat, but they get really close to the ground, right? They had to put blocks on the rudder pedals because he couldn't fly it otherwise. His feet wouldn't reach the rudder pedals. Went from 01 to 06. He was a colonel when the war ended, and when the Second World War ended, they busted him down to his permanent grade, which was captain. Works his way back up in the Korean War. Now it was the Army Air Corps. Now it's the Air Force. Works his way up to colonel again, a lieutenant colonel, and then he gets busted down. He retires. War in Vietnam starts. Korea's over. War in Vietnam starts not long afterwards. He says, well, I got to go back and defend the Republic. And I've got 1 million hours in just about every aircraft. Goes to the Air Force and says, I'm ready to fly. I keep beating this up. I'm ready to fly. They said, no, you're old. You're too old. It's flew propeller driven. No.
Right.
You can't. Go away. He walks across, this is hyperbole a little bit, walks across the street, enlists in the Army, goes to warrant officer flight training, becomes a helicopter pilot, and gets the Medal of Honor for action in Vietnam. The Air Force didn't want him.
Yeah.
But he was a young kid flying B-29s. The Memphis Belle is a movie to watch, a true story, and it's particularly true because it highlights the fact that you got 26-year-old people running everything.
Yeah. Really puts it into perspective, being that the ball and the tail gunner in that movie. Fantastic. Now, let's transition to some more recent topics.
Very well.
I'd love to get your perspective on the pullout of Afghanistan. Which I don't know. Like, can we compare that to Saigon? Is that even in the same ballpark?
No, much worse than Saigon.
I would venture to agree with that.
I mean, we had left. I was among the very few people in 1972 who were still combat soldiers because I was an advisor, and there were very few advisors left. All the units, the TO&E units, had already left by the time I got there on the 4th of July of 72. And by the time we left again in January, first week in January 73, we left. Don't forget, then 2 years ensued before the North Vietnamese took over. So we had long gone. I mean, no, that's not what happened. That's not what happened in Afghanistan. And we gave up Bagram Air. Why would you do that?
Right. Strategic.
I mean, insane. I mean, you have stupid people running with no idea of what it takes in order to run a military operation of any size, making strategic decisions from a great distance away, which made it extremely difficult, actually impossible, to get out of Afghanistan. No, the evacuation of Afghanistan much worse.
Yeah.
And and actually run by people who are much more stupid.
Yeah, it is baffling of the mind, right? Sure, there has to be some sort of political aspect of this pressuring, the minds of the Pentagon, but are we to believe that the entire military leadership was sitting there saying, "Yes, this is a great idea. We're gonna fucking pull out in the middle of the night. We're gonna leave all of our allies. We're not even gonna tell them. We're just gonna leave." Like that, to me, and speaking to someone from the special operations community, like as a special operations operator, you are dealing on the equity of the American government, on your ability to coerce or influence these groups of people to do the things that you're going to do.
You're the pointy end of the spear,
right? And if now we're asking group guys, CAG guys, all these individuals, these operators today to go in and do the same job, knowing that like the United States government does not have your back. Like they're going to leave you, high and dry. It'll make the next situation is going to make Benghazi or Extortion 17 look like a child's play in the grand scheme of things, and it's probably going to happen with China. Who knows, but. How are we supposed to, as veterans that have watched our brothers and sisters die in defense of the people of Afghanistan? How are we supposed to swallow that? How are we supposed?
No, you're not supposed to swallow it because you know better, because you've been at the pointy end of the spear. Decisions were made by people who either didn't know what they were doing or did know what they were doing and did it anyway, and in both cases, we should be very much chagrined about that. It was George Santayana who once wrote, "People who ignore history are doomed to repeat it." Mm-hmm. We should have learned something from leaving not just Vietnam, but other places where we pulled out unceremoniously and suffered the consequences of doing that.
Mogadishu,
for example, and didn't learn a damn thing from it. The general officers and flag officers who presided over the withdrawal from Afghanistan, just as one example, had been in and out of Afghanistan for 20 years. They knew what it took to secure the air base, what it took to secure the route from the embassy to the air base. They knew they had an op plan. They had an op plan that was extant since 2008. The combatant commander each year has to submit review op plans, send them back to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and certify that this is what we're going to do if we have to execute this op plan, or this is what we were going to do. We've changed it. I want your approval to change the troop list and so on. I mean, they knew exactly what it took in order to do that. And yet, when the ground component commander got there, the first thing he had to do was commit the reserve.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells you instantly that the troop list was not the right troop list. But wait a minute. What was that combatant commander's staff doing when they said, yeah, we can execute this plan? You couldn't execute the plan. A private no-class dogface could tell you that you couldn't execute the plan. And so there's a lot of blame to go around. Some of it was motivated by political considerations, but at the end of the day, if somebody tells you to execute it, look, if you're down at the bottom of the food chain and somebody says, take that hill, and you think it's a crappy job, you say, that's a really crappy job. Well, yeah, it is, but go ahead and do it anyway. And you do if the order is not immoral or illegal, because at the bottom of the food chain, you don't have a real good feel for what the strategic implications of you're not taking that hill. And there are, even tactical considerations. If you don't take that hill, the guys on your left and your right, those units don't have a chance because the enemy's going to have a salient into your position. And it's going to be really bad, and you're probably going to get killed or wounded, but you get up there and get it.
Yeah.
But when you're at the top of the food chain, you not only have an obligation to make sure that we don't do anything immoral or illegal, you have an obligation to make sure that we don't do anything stupid.
Yeah.
And that's where the uniformed leadership, to say nothing of the political leadership, failed
Yeah.
in Afghanistan. we can't execute this op plan. And we can't execute it because we don't have enough troops to do it. And we already gave away Bagram. We're going to have to figure out some other way to evacuate. And by the way, if you're at the top of the military food chain, you should have been, since we gave away Bagram in the first place, we should have been saying, after we gave it away, we've got like about a week to get everybody out of there.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to wait until it's impossible to evacuate. And that's it. And those 13 kids who got killed are a direct result of inadequate decisions being made by people who ought to know better.
Yeah, and you have a lot of private industry and veterans collaborating together, going into a combat environment without the protections of sovereignty that is afforded to the United States military. So these people are going in there under their own accord, operating to get people out of Afghanistan. And these are former special operations guys
I talked to them all. I mean, we got. Right? I could tell you. Well, we could all tell stories about friends we had who engineered getting people out who otherwise would be dead now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs, and it begs the question, from your position, what is the geopolitical climate of today? We see Russia, we see China. Are we equipped for either of these, nation states? And do you see kinetic warfare on the horizon?
Well, China is an interesting, because it's completely different. The Chinese are internally weak at the moment. They've got economic problems, they've got political problems, and so on. In the past, when China has been weak, it has turned inside itself and didn't expand. But we're in a different environment now. Technology is such that China can be weak, which it is, and is using expansion for a wide variety of geopolitical purposes that it can do. Chinese have the biggest navy in the world. I'm old enough to remember when we were talking about having a U.S. Navy of 600 ships.
Yeah.
I think we've got 253 ships now, capital ships. And make no mistake about it, they're far more capable than any of the Chinese capability, but the Chinese are expanding. And people who are allies of ours, friends of ours, and even erstwhile enemies of ours, including Vietnam, have asked us for assistance.
Yeah.
To the extent that we can make sure that we demonstrate to the Philippines, to South Korea, to Japan, to Vietnam, and others, that we are not going to leave them that we are, in fact, going to defend their interests. And by the way, our strategic interests in the Western Pacific, we need to do that. We can do it with a presence, which we're trying to do, but we need to do a much better job of convincing both the Chinese and our allies that we're actually going to do that. However, now for the bad news. I don't think the Chinese have to invade Taiwan. They don't have to invade Taiwan. Recent polls inside Taiwan, where the average age is like 16, right? Nobody remembers 1949. Indicate that they would prefer to be part of a greater China that's economically strong than be independent. The Chinese have they're in it for the long game. I think they've come to the conclusion they don't have to risk war with the United States or indeed anybody else in the region. They just have to outweigh us.
Yeah.
With respect,
and they're great at that.
Yeah, and they're really good at that. I mean, they have a long view of history. We want satisfaction the day after tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we're terrible at long-range planning. With respect to Russia, it's kind of interesting because the Russians also are viewing this. They're terrible on the battlefield. We teach E1s how to make decisions on the fly, and if we tell you to go right and you can't go right, you go left.
Yeah.
If your leaders have been killed or wounded, you take charge. And there's no end of stories. We don't have the time to talk about some of the Medal of Honor recipients I've known who've been of extremely low rank and have taken charge of large formations of American troops in order to accomplish the mission, because that's the way they were taught. We teach combined arm tactics. Mm-hmm. We're going to integrate infantry, armor, artillery, intelligence, logistics, all into one. The Russians don't do this at all. And one of the reasons they're in the position that they're in now, where they failed at Kiev, Oh, we're going to take it over. No, you're not going to take it over because you'll send all your tanks down one MSR and they're all going to get taken out piecemeal.
Right. We saw that in the spring.
Ridiculous. They have no NCO Corps.
Yeah.
We have strong NCO Corps. We teach NCOs how to act and what to do to take charge of large formations. Their NCO Corps are not allowed to make battlefield decisions. They have no junior officer corps. Nobody below the grade of about colonel is allowed to make a decision. You wonder why they've had so many generals killed and wounded? It's because people like us can't make decisions. They have to bring some general from the rear area forward to make a decision.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to do it. It's all been top down. Russia hasn't changed in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And it's not going to change. It's all top down. And it will continue that way. Russia's view is that if they wait long enough, the West will get tired of supporting Ukraine, and Ukraine will get weak enough so that they can take over Ukraine, or we will get tired of supporting Ukraine, and there will be some sort of negotiated settlement where they will keep the Donbass and Crimea and maybe a land bridge to Moldova. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And they'll wait. They'll just wait. They'll outwait us.
If I may be so bold, I mean, I think that was the strategy that Putin and Obama were trying to negotiate for, was the giving up of all that land.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, we're negotiating somebody else's future.
Right. It sounds like World War II all over again.
Wait a minute. It's exactly World War II all over.
And all of this problem is really the residual results of land treaties from the end of World War II.
Everybody who forgets history is doomed to repeat it, and we're repeating it.
Yeah,
time and time again.
It's a sad state, right? And I'm surprised that we look across the landscape today and we see the challenges of military recruiting. And this is anecdotal. I don't have any evidence to support this, but I believe that the only people that are joining the military today are the individuals that have come from military families, because that's the only people.
An increasing percentage of people who are in uniform are the relatives of people who have served in uniform. This is not a bad thing, but you're looking at somebody who believes in universal service. Mm. I think if you're lucky enough to live in a free country, you owe it something in the form of service, which is why I joined the Army.
Yeah.
I thought that I was going to come in the Army for 3 years and then get out, but I stayed because I couldn't stand the idea of leaving. I loved the people and I wanted to stay around them. Now, like I said, we've outsourced the defense of the Republic to a very small number of young men and women who are willing to do it. I think this is extremely dangerous. A wide gulf has opened up between those people who are serving and those people who are being served. The latter saying, well, I got it coming to me.
Yeah.
People are out there, no. Your freedom was bought at an enormous price, yeah, and is continuing to be bought at an enormous price. We have people out there right now defending your sorry ass.
Yeah.
But we don't have the political will to do otherwise, which is a very, very sad state of affairs. When you talk about recruiting, the Army has a very, very difficult row to hoe. I think we're missing our recruitment goals. I think if you look at it strategically, however, we're even in bigger trouble in the equipment-centric services like the Navy and the Air Force. Think about it. You got an aircraft carrier out there, and I don't know, the complement is 5,500 people. I'm making the numbers up. You can run it with 5,400 people, actually, 5,200 or 5,000. Maybe you can run it with 5,000. But at 4,999, you can't. It's really binomial.
Yeah.
Because you won't be able to have sufficient people in critical MOSs to do the stuff you really need to accomplish, and the ship's going to just lie at anchor. Same thing in the Air Force. If you can't get people into critical MOSs and keep them, you're not going to be able to fly airplanes.
Well, that's part of the challenge that the United States Navy is having right now is, they don't have enough critical skills to get the ships out of the yards. And that's why we're behind. Right?
Very dangerous.
And the last time that China controlled the seas, it was a very powerful dynasty. Right.
Yeah.
And they've made it very, very vocal in saying, the strategic objectives of the CCP is to own the oceans, because once they own the oceans, the dynasty returns and they have full control.
I'll tell you something else. I'm making this number up too. In order to do what we need to do, we need to build, I'll make the number up, 1.8 submarines a year. 2.1 submarines, whatever the number is. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
We're building 1.2 submarines a year. That's not enough to maintain our own defense, let alone the defense of our allies and friends. Very, very dangerous. And if you think about what technology is like today, and I don't want to cast any aspersions at the surface Navy or make their lives any more difficult, but the surface Navy is at increasing risk because of the technological capability to take them out.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the USS Cole, lost 17 kids, blew a big hole in the Cole from a rubber boat. It means that fast attack submarines and ballistic missile submarines may wind up being the only force that's survivable on the oceans. I mean, and we're not building enough of them.
Yeah.
We better get serious about a wide variety of things in recruitments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only positive thing, that I see coming out of the Ukraine war is the secret that kind of was exposed. For a long period of time, the United States said that we have no retaliation to the hypersonic missiles of China and Russia. And the Patriot's missile system has proven that, once again, this 1990s technology from the Aegis systems is able to combat those challenges.
Our relationship with Israel is proved to be extremely helpful in that regard. I mean, we're very closely allied with them, obviously, for a wide variety of political reasons, but also for technological reasons. I got to tell you a really quick story about that kind of stuff. Years ago, when I was teaching at the National War College, at the end of the year, each of the instructors would take a group of about 15 students who all grew up to be ambassadors, generals, admirals, and all the rest of it. We take them out to a group of 3 countries. They went once to Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and so on. Once went to Israel, Egypt, and Turkey. And this is a long, long time ago. Out in the middle of nowhere at some airfield in Israel with a bunch of long-haired kids and some Israel Defense Force colonel. And the kids were playing with model airplanes. And we thought it was the funniest thing. What are they doing? And this colonel said, "Gentlemen, take a look at this. You're looking at the future of aviation." This was 1983 or 4. And was that the first drones we ever used, we bought from Israel Aircraft Industries. The first ones we ever manufactured, we manufactured under license from IAI.
I believe it. Yeah.
And they were instrumental in assisting us getting the Patriot system up to where it can do the job today.
That's incredible. That's incredible stuff. Well, Jack, I think this has been a very informative podcast and conversation. I appreciate the time and I appreciate.
No, it's my great
knowledge.
pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. And if people want to learn more about you or read any of your great writings, where can they find?
Well, I've got
more
a book.
about you?
I got 2 books out. One is called "If Not Now, When." It's it's a memoir that I was dragooned into writing, but it's enormous fun, and I think people would enjoy it. If Not Now, When. The other book is called Basic. It's just anecdotes about basic training in boot camp. I surveyed a bazillion people and got all the best stories. Many of them outrageously funny.
Yes.
Certainly mildly amusing, and would anybody who's been through boot camp or basic training would say, that happened to a guy in my unit. It's called Basic. I don't have a website or anything like that. I'm not on social media at all. So those are the 2 ways you look at NBC from time to time. There are lots of. I've been on the air on and off for NBC and MSNBC for 20 years. There's got to be 800 billion trillion segments of me on television at one time or another, talking about stuff which I probably would say that's not true anymore, and so on. If I could, no, I didn't know what I was talking about then. I do now, though. So that's the only way to find me.
You're very well informed, I'd say.
You're
Jack.
very kind. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
and
Tim.
it's been quite the pleasure having you on the show.
My great pleasure.
I hope you guys want to learn more about Jack and his extraordinary life and the things he's done, what he's brought to leadership within the people that he influences, and the entrepreneurial aspect of his life as well. This is a very layered individual, and I got to say, say, an American treasure. So thank you very much for everything you've contributed to the work that you do and the work you continue to do. And that, my friends, is another podcast of American Grit. You know the drill. Be kind to one another and take care of yourself. We'll see you soon.